Welcome to Legal Minds. In this presentation, I will be covering Section 47 along with Denzel. Section 47 is essentially an assault occasioning actual bodily harm, or as Lord Hobhouse put it in Chan Fook, there must be an assault which, besides being an assault, causes the victim some injury. So, the actus reus of Section 47 is essentially an assault or a battery. It can also be an indirect battery. Now, Denzel and myself have done two presentations for this. We've done one solely on a technical assault, so where you cause the victim to apprehend unlawful force, and we've done one on battery, where you actually apply unlawful force. So if you haven't seen those already, I highly recommend you do, because they essentially form the basis for Section 47. You cannot be guilty of Section 47 of the Offences Against the Person Act unless you have already committed an assault or a battery. They form the basis of the offence. So what's actually meant by actual bodily harm? Well, in the case of Miller, it was said to involve any hurt or injury calculated to interfere with the health or comfort of the victim. Therefore, it has a fairly wide definition. In the case of Chan Fook, Lord Hobhouse defined it a little bit differently. He didn't really define it. He just said that it doesn't require any elaboration at all. He said it requires no elaboration and that it's synonymous for injury. So there is a little bit of disagreement as to the meaning of actual bodily harm, but it's safe to say it has a fairly wide scope. Generally, the Miller definition is preferred. Any hurt or injury calculated to interfere with the health or comfort of the victim. It's fairly wide. It can cover a great range of injuries, any hurt or injury. It doesn't have to be serious. Any hurt or injury will suffice. Lord Hobhouse also said that the word actual, so actual bodily harm, indicates that the injury should not be so trivial as to be wholly insignificant. So it mustn't be too minor. Something like a scratch is probably just going to be a battery. I doubt the court's going to convict you of Section 47 because you caused somebody a scratch. I mean, it's possible. It depends on the nature of the scratch, the length of the scratch, but generally a scratch really is only going to be battery. It has to be more than wholly insignificant. It can't be too trivial. Now, despite being called actual bodily harm, the harm need not manifest itself physically. It doesn't necessarily need to be harm to the body. It can be psychiatric injury, as shown in Chan Fook, where Lord Justice Hobhouse said it is capable of including psychiatric injury, but it does not include mere emotions such as fear, distress, or panic. So in other words, it must be a recognized psychiatric illness. Emotions, regardless of how strong they are not sufficient. And the case of Ireland gave us some guidance on what could amount to psychiatric injury. The court in Ireland endorsed Chan Fook, but they then went on to say that psychiatric injury includes anxiety, neurosis, and depressive disorders. So we have some guidance as to what it is. In an exam, they're not going to expect you to have a medical degree or understand, all of the psychiatric injuries, but they will throw hints at you as to whether or not the victim has a psychiatric injury, but you have to watch out for it. And the case of Dhaliwal 2006 tells us that psychiatric harm that falls short of an actual psychiatric illness is not ABH. So in other words, there must be expert evidence that the victim suffered psychiatric harm, recognized psychiatric harm, that is. And psychiatric harm doesn't necessarily have to be ABH, it can be GBH if it's severe enough. And the case of Ireland tells us that. So if it's severe, it's not likely to be Section 47. It's probably going to be something like Section 20 or Section 18 GBH if it's really serious. But again, Ireland shows us that if the psychiatric harm is severe enough, it can be really serious. It can be GBH, sorry. And the case of T in DPP tells us that a momentary loss of consciousness is sufficient for ABH. Now, just like psychiatric injury, this could also be GBH if it's extended enough, if it's for a long period of time, because the longer one is unconscious, the more deprived their brain will be of oxygen. So a momentary loss of consciousness is sufficient for ABH. If it's long enough, it could be GBH. And lastly, in the case of DPP and Smith, the court held that cutting somebody's hair without their permission would be sufficient for ABH. The court's reasoning behind that decision was that our hair is integral to our identity. It's a fundamental part of who we are, despite the fact that it's a dead tissue. I shall now let Denzel take over, and he will be covering what's meant by occasioning, and he will also be covering the mens rea of Section 47.
So swiftly moving on to occasioning. The common law definition is provided by Roberts. Occasioning means to cause. Therefore, you need to know your cases on causation. This is a result crime. It is therefore essential that you prove causation. Battery can be indirect for Section 47, but you still have to establish causation as shown in Roberts. And as long as the victim acted in a reasonably foreseeable fashion, the chain of causation will not be broken. Battery can also be committed by an omission, as shown in the case of Santana and Muniz. And on to the mens rea. So the case of Savage and Parmenter clearly highlights that intention or subjective recklessness is all that is needed in regards to an assault. There is no need for the defendant to intend or be reckless to cause ABH.